The appointment was at 11. I had confirmed it twice, once the week before and once the morning of, because the deposit was $1,200 and the full gown came to $4,150, and I had been setting money aside for 14 months to pay for it without asking anyone. Not because Daniel couldn't help. Not because we were stretched thin. Because I wanted one thing in this wedding that Patricia Prescott had not selected, funded, adjusted, or quietly redirected toward her own vision of what my life should look like. The woman behind the boutique counter looked at me with the particular stillness of someone who has to deliver news they didn't create. Her hands were flat on the glass case. She didn't reach for a file or pull up a screen. She already knew who I was before I said my name. "I'm so sorry," she said. "The order was cancelled 3 days ago. The deposit was refunded to the card on file. I had paid with a Visa in my name only. An account Patricia Prescott had never seen, never touched, and didn't know existed." "That's not possible," I said. "I'm the only person authorized to make changes to that order." The woman's expression didn't shift. Patient, practiced, the face of someone who has watched this exact conversation play out before and knows exactly where it ends. The cancellation was phoned in by a Mrs. Patricia Prescott. She identified herself as the mother of the groom. If you've ever had someone smile at your face while quietly dismantling something behind your back, I need you to hit that like button and subscribe right now. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I genuinely read every single one, and today I need to know I'm not the only person who has ever stood in a bridal boutique deciding whether to cry or to start building. Now let me take you back, because this moment did not happen in a vacuum. It was the last move in a pattern that had been running for 18 months. And the reason Patricia felt safe making it is the same reason she had been safe making every move before it. She had never once been stopped. I need you to understand one thing before I take you back to the beginning. The dress was the last thing she touched. But the apartment lease, the one she co-signed to ensure she would always have a foothold in our life, I had already changed that 2 weeks before she picked up the phone. Daniel Prescott and I met at a continuing education seminar on commercial property law, which is exactly as romantic as it sounds. He was there because his firm had sent him. I was there because I actually needed the information. I work in property leasing for a mid-sized commercial real estate company in Chicago. I spend my days reading contracts, reviewing maintenance obligations, and flagging language in lease agreements that most people would sign without reading. I have a reputation at my firm for being thorough. My supervisor calls it methodical. My coworkers call it the reason they send me the ones nobody else wants to touch. Daniel called it impressive, which was how I knew he was worth talking to. We dated for 8 months before he brought me home to meet his family. He described the dinner as casual. He used that word twice in the same sentence, which should have been my first signal, because nothing about the Prescott residence was casual. The driveway was longer than my entire apartment building. The front door was a custom mahogany double entry, recently refinished. I could still smell the tung oil faintly in the November air. I noted the door because I note things like that. Solid core, custom width, the kind of hardware you special order. I knew what it cost. I also understood what it was meant to communicate. Patricia Prescott opened it before we knocked. She was 56 years old at the time and had spent the better part of 3 decades perfecting the art of making warmth look like a performance. She wore a cream-colored dress that was just formal enough to remind you that this was her home and that she had prepared for it. Her smile found Daniel first, it always did, and then it moved to me and held there, technically warm, the kind of warmth that sits right at the edge of sincere without crossing it. "You must be Nora." She said my name the way you'd recite an address you weren't entirely sure was correct. "Daniel has told us so much about you." I extended my hand. She took it with both of hers, a 2-handed clasp that read as affectionate and functioned as an assessment. "A leasing coordinator," she said, turning to lead us inside. "How practical." She let the word float. Light, unthreatening, the kind of word that functions as a compliment the way a screen door functions as a wall. Daniel touched the small of my back as we stepped inside, and at the time I read it as reassurance. Later I understood it was a reflexive gesture. The kind you develop when you've spent your whole life standing between two things you don't know how to hold at the same time. Dinner was 4 courses. Richard Prescott, Daniel's father, was quiet and generous and asked me 3 genuine questions about my work. Patricia asked 2. Neither one was about my work. One was about my family and where they were from. The other was about whether Daniel and I had discussed where we'd eventually want to settle, and she delivered it at the exact moment she passed me the bread basket, wrapped in hospitality, so I couldn't answer it the way I wanted to. I want to be fair about this, because the story doesn't work if Patricia is a cartoon. She is not. She is a woman who has spent 30 years operating from a single belief system, that the people she loves require management, and that management is the same thing as care. She doesn't lie, exactly. She repositions. She doesn't demand. She offers. The offer is always real in the financial sense. The money exists, the payment clears, the gesture is genuine. But the offer always arrives at the moment before a decision needs to be made. And once Patricia has paid for something, the decision drifts toward her the way water finds the lowest point in a room. Daniel proposed in April. He did it quietly, at home, with a ring he had chosen himself, and it was exactly right. I said yes before he finished the sentence. By the following weekend, Patricia had called 3 wedding venues on our behalf to inquire about availability. She told us she was saving us time. She had relationships, she explained. She could get us on waiting lists that weren't publicly posted. By the time Daniel mentioned it to me, 2 of the venues had already been toured, without me present. Patricia had taken photographs and sent them to Daniel in a shared album. Just options, she said. Just giving us a head start. I looked at the photos. I said thank you. I put them in a folder on my phone that I never opened again. Then came the guest list. Patricia presented her version at a Sunday dinner, 140 names, 62 of them her own. Clients, former colleagues, neighbors, women from her garden association, men Daniel had met once at Christmas when he was 22. She called it a starting point. A draft we could adjust from there. By the 3rd conversation about the guest list, her 62 had reduced to 51. But the framing hadn't moved. Every conversation happened in her living room, over her coffee, at a time she had chosen. My mother's name did not appear until draft 4. My mother, who has been planning to attend her daughter's wedding since I was 8 years old, appeared on the 4th draft of a list as an addition. I said nothing. I was watching. I have learned, through 11 years of reviewing lease disputes and property disagreements, that you do not respond to a single incident when you haven't mapped the full system. Responding to one clause while the rest of the contract stands is how you lose ground you cannot recover. The florist Patricia offered to pay for had a specific aesthetic she had already established a relationship with. Not the one I had chosen. When the deposit cleared under Patricia's name, the consultation shifted to her. The invitations she funded were revised 3 times. The final version carried a font and color palette I had never selected. When I mentioned the original design, soft ivory cardstock with pressed sage lettering, the samples I had brought to a meeting, she said the printer had recommended against it. I called the printer the following Thursday. They had not been consulted. Each time I said something, Patricia would soften. She would tell me she'd overstepped, that she was just trying to help, that I should tell her exactly what I wanted and she would step back. And then the following week, the same thing would happen in a different category. A menu substitution. A ceremony time adjusted without discussion. A vendor swap framed as an upgrade. Not because Patricia couldn't hear me. Because she was counting on the fact that I'd rather absorb it than put Daniel in the middle again. And this is where I have to be honest about Daniel. He is not a bad man. He is a man who loves his mother and has spent 33 years learning that the path of least resistance in Patricia Prescott's household is to let her have what she wants and wait for the turbulence to settle. After each incident, he would tell me she meant well. That she was just excited. That this was how she expressed love. I believed him the first 4 times. By the 7th, I had stopped hearing the explanation and started noticing that it was always the same one, each time wearing different packaging. The apartment arrived in September, 5 months after the engagement. Daniel and I had been searching on our own, and we had found something I genuinely loved. A 2-bedroom in a building on Halsted, south-facing windows, a management company with a clean maintenance record. I had pulled the lease and read every clause before we submitted the application. $2,200 a month. Comfortably within our combined income, with room to save. Patricia heard about it at dinner one Sunday and said nothing that evening. 3 days later, she called Daniel. A friend of hers managed a building in Lincoln Park, she explained. Newer construction, higher ceilings, better amenities. And Patricia, as a favor, would co-sign as guarantor to help us secure a lower rate. Daniel brought it to me as an opportunity. I took out a legal pad and asked him one question. What happens if Patricia decides she wants to alter the terms, or remove her name from the guarantee, or add a condition to her co-signature at some point down the road? He looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something technically possible but socially unreasonable. She's my mother, Nora. Not a corporation. I know, I said. I just want to understand the full agreement before we sign it. We toured the Lincoln Park apartment. It was beautiful. Taller ceilings, updated kitchen, a lake view that justified the premium. And Patricia's name on the guarantor line of the lease, which meant Patricia's name was on the legal document that governed where we lived and under what conditions. I signed. I told myself I was being practical rather than fearful. I told myself that her wanting to help did not mean she was constructing a mechanism of control. 11 months later, I understood that I had been wrong about that last part. By October, the pattern had extended into the rehearsal dinner venue, the ceremony music, and the honeymoon itinerary Patricia had requested we share with her for coordination purposes. The seating chart for the engagement party she hosted that November had my mother placed at the second table, third row, between two people she had never met. When I moved my mother's card before the guests arrived, Patricia moved it back before dinner was served. I stood in the powder room of that house for 4 minutes with my hands under cold water. Not because I was going to cry. Because I was calculating the distance between where I was and where I needed to be. I opened a folder on my laptop that week. Dates, amounts, the substance of each incident. The florist redirection. The invitation revision. The guest list. The Lincoln Park lease with Patricia's name as guarantor. I noted what Daniel had been present for and what he had said and what he had chosen not to say. I have been building lease dispute files for 11 years. I know what documentation looks like before it becomes evidence. I was building mine. 14 days before I walked into that bridal boutique, I signed a different lease. A different building, a different manager, a unit I had toured alone on a Tuesday morning at 7 before work. 2 bedrooms. South-facing windows. $2,100 a month, $100 less than Lincoln Park. No cosigner. No guarantor. Just my name and Daniel's, on a document that had no line for anyone else. I had not told Daniel yet. I was going to. I was waiting for the right moment to do it together, as a conversation rather than a confrontation. The right moment didn't arrive on my schedule. It rarely does when someone else has already made a decision about your timeline. 3 days after I signed that lease, Patricia called the boutique and canceled my dress. I know this because I spent 45 minutes on the phone with the boutique manager the afternoon I walked in and found the order gone. She was apologetic in the specific way that told me this particular situation was not entirely unfamiliar to her. The cancellation had been phoned in on a Wednesday at 2:17 in the afternoon. The caller had provided my full name, Daniel's full name, and the order number. The order number. A sequence I had never written down anywhere except in one place. One text message I had sent to Daniel the afternoon I placed the order, with the confirmation screenshot attached, because he had asked me to keep him updated on the planning. Patricia did not guess that number. She did not find it by accident or coincidence. She had it because Daniel had it, and somewhere between my phone and his, it had ended up in her hands. I sat in my car outside the boutique for 11 minutes. I did not call Daniel. I did not call Patricia. I opened the folder on my phone and added a new entry. Date, time, the boutique manager's name, the substance of the call, and the $1,200 deposit currently sitting in a refund queue under Patricia Prescott's direction. Then I opened the new lease on my phone, the one signed 2 weeks ago, the one with no cosigner, no guarantor, no foothold for anyone who had not been invited. I read the first clause out loud to myself in an empty parking lot. And then I closed the document, started the car, and drove home. Not because I was done. Because I was ready. Daniel was home when I got there. He was at the kitchen counter with his laptop open and a glass of water he hadn't touched. He looked up when I came in, and I could tell from the way he looked at me that he already knew something had happened. Not what, maybe. But that the day had turned in a direction he hadn't accounted for. I set my bag down on the chair by the door. I didn't raise my voice. I have never once in my life resolved a serious problem by raising my voice. The boutique called the order number in to cancel, I said. The order number that only existed in one text message. The one I sent to you with the confirmation screenshot in April. He didn't answer immediately. He closed the laptop, slowly, the way people close things when they need a moment to arrange their face. She asked me about the dress, he said. She was asking about the planning. I didn't think she was going to do anything with it. You gave her the number. I showed her the confirmation. She was asking what style I had picked, what you had picked. She wanted to know what it looked like. And you showed her the document. I showed her a screenshot. He set both hands flat on the counter. Nora, I didn't know she was going to call and cancel it. I would never have let her do that. There was a version of this conversation where I let that sentence carry the weight he needed it to carry. Where I accepted that he hadn't known, hadn't intended it, had been caught between two things the way he always was. There was a version where I told him it was fine and we moved forward together. I had spent 14 months saving for that dress. $4,150, plus the deposit, set aside from a salary I had earned, in an account that was mine alone. And the only reason Patricia had been able to cancel it was because the man I was going to marry handed her the information she needed without asking me first. I know you didn't intend for it to happen, I said. I need you to understand that the outcome is the same either way. He looked at me for a long time. The glass of water on the counter had a ring forming underneath it on the granite. He hadn't moved it since I walked in. What are you going to do? He said. I'm going to handle it, I said. But I need to know, right now, whether you're going to stand with me when I do. He said yes. He said it without hesitating, and I believed him in the way you believe someone who means what they say in a kitchen on a Tuesday evening but hasn't yet been tested in a room full of people he's spent his whole life trying not to disappoint. I told him about the new lease that night. I laid the document on the counter between us. I watched him read it. His eyes moved slowly across the first page, then the second. When he reached the guarantor section, blank, and signed, "No Patricia Prescott" anywhere in the document, he set the page down and looked up at me. You did this already? He said. 2 weeks ago. You signed a lease without telling me? I signed a lease in both our names, I said. The same way your mother co-signed one in her name without asking me. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the kind that contains two people trying to decide whether they are looking at the same problem or two different ones. Daniel picked up the lease again, read the address, ran the numbers in his head. It's $100 cheaper, he said. I know. He set it down. He pressed his thumb against the edge of the page like he was testing its weight. Then he said, very quietly, okay. That one word cost him something. I heard it in the way he said it. Patricia called the following morning. I didn't answer. She called Daniel 4 minutes later. He sent her to voicemail and texted me that he'd done it. I noted the timestamp. 3 days later, an invitation arrived. Not digital, a physical card, cream envelope, Patricia's handwriting in the center, the kind of penmanship that gets practiced. She was hosting a family dinner at the end of the month. A planning dinner, she called it. A chance to bring both families together, to align on the final details before the calendar got too full. She had invited my parents. She had included a handwritten note that said she was so looking forward to having everyone in one room. My mother called me the evening after the invitation arrived. She sounded cautiously optimistic, which is the specific emotional register my mother uses when she has been hoping for something for a long time and doesn't want to let herself fully believe it might happen. She seems like she's making an effort, my mother said. Maybe this will be good. I told her I would pick her and Dad up on the way. I want to explain what this dinner was designed to accomplish, because Patricia is not careless. Every move she makes is calculated at least 2 steps ahead, and this one was no different. She had cancelled my dress. She had done it using information her son had given her, and she had done it without warning, which meant she was either confident I wouldn't act, or confident that any action I took would be absorbed by the family dynamic the same way every other incident had been absorbed, quietly, with Daniel in the middle, and Patricia in a position to reframe it as miscommunication. The dinner was her reset. A room full of people who loved her, her home, her agenda, her framing of events. She would present the wedding plans as they currently stood, her versions of them, and in doing so, re-establish herself as the person who had been holding everything together. If the dress came up, she would handle it graciously. She would say she had already found a replacement, something more appropriate for the venue, and she would make it sound like she had done me a favor. She didn't know I had the file. She didn't know about the lease. And she didn't know that for the first time in 18 months, I was not going to sit quietly and wait for the turbulence to pass. If you've been following this story and you know exactly what it feels like to watch someone systematically take over something that belongs to you while everyone around you calls it helpfulness, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. This story is about to turn, and I don't want you to miss what happens in that dining room. Your support means everything and it helps me keep bringing you stories like this one. I wore the same dress I had worn to the boutique the day I placed the order. Not for symbolism. Because it fit well and I needed to feel like myself. My parents arrived at my apartment at 5. My mother brought a hostess gift, a jar of fig preserves from the farmer's market, because that is who she is. My father wore a sport coat. They were making an effort, which made me feel, briefly, like I was leading them somewhere I wasn't entirely sure they were prepared for. On the drive over, my mother asked about the dress. I told her we were handling it. She asked what that meant. I told her she would understand by the end of the evening. She looked at me the way mothers look at their children when they recognize a composure that belongs to them. Patricia's house was lit from the inside when we pulled up. The driveway held 4 cars, including Richard's sedan and a catering van that had apparently delivered food for a dinner Patricia had described as a simple family gathering. I noted that. Simple family gatherings do not require outside catering. Daniel met us at the door. He kissed me on the cheek and shook my father's hand and hugged my mother with genuine warmth. He was holding himself carefully, the way a person does when they have committed to something they know is going to be hard and are trying to make sure their body doesn't betray them before it starts. She doesn't know anything, he said quietly, into my ear as we stepped inside. I know, I said. Patricia was in the living room with Richard, a couple I recognized from the engagement party, neighbors of theirs, Gerald and Maureen Firth, the kind of long-standing friends who have been witnesses to every Prescott milestone for 20 years. And my future sister-in-law, Celia, who had driven in from Indianapolis and who had always treated me with a straightforward kindness that stood out in contrast to everything else in this house. Patricia crossed the room. She took my hands in both of hers, the same two-handed clasp from the first night, and smiled at me with such warmth that someone who didn't know the history would have believed every word of it. Nora. You look wonderful. She turned to my parents. You must be Sandra and Frank. I have been looking forward to this evening so much. Come in, come in. She moved through the room like a woman who had just won something and was gracious enough not to show it. The table was set for 10. Good china, actual cloth napkins, a centerpiece that matched the seasonal florals she had insisted on for the wedding reception. She had created a consistency, a visual argument that said, "This is the aesthetic. I have already decided what the wedding will look like. This is evidence." Dinner was served at 7. The conversation was warm for the first 40 minutes. My father and Richard talked about baseball, which turned out to be the thing they had in common. Gerald Firth asked Daniel about his firm. Celia sat beside me and at one point leaned over and said, quietly, "You're very calm for someone in the middle of wedding planning," and I told her I was just organized, which made her laugh. Patricia waited until the main course was nearly finished. She had the timing of someone who has hosted many tables, who understands that people are most open to receiving information when they are comfortable, fed, and faintly tired. She set down her fork, folded her hands, and addressed the table with the easy authority of someone calling a meeting to order. "I want to take a moment to share some updates on the wedding plans." She smiled around the table. "I know there's been a lot of moving pieces, and I just want to make sure everyone is on the same page." She began with the venue, which had been finalized. Then the florist, who had confirmed the centerpiece designs that Patricia had approved the previous week. Then the catering, where she had negotiated directly with the vendor to include a third appetizer course at no additional charge. She delivered each item with the quiet satisfaction of a contractor reviewing a completed phase of work. My mother was nodding along. Gerald Firth said that sounded lovely. Richard refilled his wine. Then Patricia reached for an envelope beside her plate. Cream-colored, the same stock as the invitation. She opened it and removed 2 photographs, which she passed to my mother. "And regarding the gown," she said, "I took the liberty of finding something I think is much better suited to the venue's aesthetic. I've already made an inquiry at the boutique, and they can accommodate us at short notice." My mother looked at the photographs. Her expression went carefully neutral, which is the face she makes when she has just received information she wasn't expecting and doesn't yet know what to do with. "Patricia," my mother said, "Nora had already chosen her dress." "She had," Patricia said. "But the original selection wasn't quite right for the formality of the space. I spoke with the boutique, and they were very understanding." My father looked at me. Not at Patricia. At me. His eyes asked a question. I set my napkin on the table. I kept my hands flat on either side of my plate. I spoke without raising my voice, without shifting my posture, without any of the visible signals that usually precede a scene. "The boutique wasn't understanding," I said. "They were professional. There's a difference." The order was cancelled without my authorization, using information that was taken from a private text message. The table stilled. Not all at once, in sequence, like lights going out in a building from one end to the other. Gerald Firth stopped mid-reach for his water glass. Maureen set her fork down. Celia looked at her brother. Patricia's smile held, but the quality of it changed. It became the smile of someone managing a situation rather than enjoying one. "Nora, I think we have different memories of that conversation." "There was no conversation," I said. "You called the boutique at 2:17 on a Wednesday afternoon. You used the order number from a screenshot Daniel had shared with you. I have the boutique manager's account in writing." Daniel did not look away from the table. His jaw was tight. I had not told him I had the written account. That was the last piece of the file I had gathered, and I had kept it close. Patricia placed both hands in her lap. Her posture was still composed, but something had shifted in the architecture of her expression. The warmth had fully become management. I was trying to help. "The dress you chose wasn't, it was $4,150, I said. "Paid from a private account you didn't know existed. It was my choice, made without your input, and it was the one decision in this wedding that you had no involvement in. That's exactly why you cancelled it." My mother made a sound that was not quite a word. My father had both hands flat on the table. Patricia looked at Daniel. The look said, "Say something. Redirect this." This is the moment the look had always worked, in every room, at every table. Daniel was the release valve. He was supposed to soften the edges, offer a different interpretation, let the moment pass. Daniel looked at me instead. He looked at me for 2 full seconds. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a document on the table. The lease. Folded in thirds, the way I had given it to him. He smoothed it flat without looking at his mother. "We signed a new lease," he said. 3 weeks ago. Different building, different address." He paused. "Different guarantor line." Patricia looked at the document. She looked at it with the specific attention of someone who has spent her adult life understanding what documents mean, and who has just encountered one she did not know existed and cannot immediately reframe. I picked up where he left off, because this was the moment, and it belonged to both of us. "Your name isn't on this lease, Patricia." 8 words. I said them the way you state a measurement. No heat, no triumph. The way you read a clause out loud to a client who needs to understand what they have agreed to. The room held its breath. Maureen Firth looked at her husband. Gerald was looking at Patricia. Richard had gone very still. Celia exhaled through her nose and looked at her hands. My mother reached under the table and found my father's hand. Patricia picked up the lease. She read the first page. She turned to the second. Her eyes moved to the guarantor section, blank, unoccupied, her name nowhere in the document, and something behind her expression shifted in a way that was difficult to watch and impossible to look away from. "You went behind my back," she said. Her voice had lost its hospitality entirely. What was underneath it was harder and less managed and in some ways more honest than anything she had said all evening. "I signed a lease in my name and your son's name for an apartment neither of us needed your permission to rent," I said. "The same way you called a boutique and cancelled a dress without my permission. The difference is that my name is on the document. And yours isn't." Richard said, "Patricia." 1 word, the way you say someone's name when you need them to stop. She looked at her husband. He looked back at her and did not offer anything else. Not agreement, not defense. Just his eyes, steady and tired and honestly said. Patricia set the lease down. She aligned it with the edge of her plate, the way you straighten something when you need something to do with your hands. The room was quiet enough that the climate control system was audible. The centerpiece, her florals, her aesthetic, her visual argument for the wedding she had been building, sat in the center of the table between us like a marker at a boundary neither of us had spoken aloud until tonight. "I've been paying for this wedding," she said. Not loudly. Almost to herself. "You've been investing in a wedding you designed," I said. "That's not the same thing. And every invoice with your name on it has a corresponding request you made without asking us first. I have the dates and the amounts, if you'd like to review them." Gerald Firth cleared his throat. Maureen was looking at the centerpiece. Patricia looked at Daniel. Her eyes asked the question they had always asked in rooms like this, at tables like this one, and Daniel answered it the only way he could, with the answer he had given me in the kitchen on a Tuesday night when it had cost him something. "Mom," he said. "She's right." The dinner ended approximately 22 minutes after that. Not in a scene, not in raised voices or chairs being pushed back. It ended the way things end when the air goes out of a room and there is nothing left that anyone knows how to say. My parents helped carry plates to the kitchen because that is who they are. Celia hugged me on the way out and held on a beat longer than necessary. Gerald and Maureen Firth said their goodbyes to Patricia with the careful warmth of people who have just witnessed something they will be discussing privately for weeks. Patricia did not say goodbye to me. She stood at the kitchen sink with her back to the room, and I did not require anything from her. Richard walked us to the door. He shook my father's hand. He looked at me and said, simply, "I'm sorry, Nora." Not for Patricia, not on her behalf. For himself. For the 30 years of watching things happen in his house and choosing the path of least resistance and ending up, on a Thursday evening, standing at his front door apologizing to the woman his son was about to marry. "Thank you, Richard," I said. And I meant it. In the car on the way back, my mother sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window at the November streets and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "When did you know you were going to do that tonight?" "When she handed you the photographs," I said. She nodded slowly. "The dress she chose isn't as nice as yours." I laughed. I hadn't expected to, and the laugh surprised me into something that was close to relief. "I know, Mom. The sage letterpress would have been beautiful." "I know that too." She reached over and put her hand on mine on the gear shift. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. That was Thursday. By Saturday morning, Patricia had called Daniel 11 times. He answered 4. The conversations were short, the last one less than 3 minutes. Afterward he sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the floor the way people do when they are reconstructing a version of their history that doesn't match the one they had been living in. "She keeps saying she was trying to protect me," he said. "Protect you from what?" "From a marriage that isn't right." He paused. "That's the exact phrase she used." I let that land where it needed to land. "What did you say?" I asked. "I told her she's been protecting me from the wrong thing for a long time." He looked up. "And that the lease we signed is the address we're giving people on the save the dates." The $1,200 deposit, refunded to my card within 4 business days, arrived on the following Monday. The boutique had processed it as a reversal of the unauthorized cancellation. The manager had been clear in her written account that the cancellation had not been initiated by the account holder, and when I forwarded that account to my own records, I also sent a copy to the boutique directly with a note of thanks. I rebooked the dress appointment for the following Saturday. The gown was still available. My size, my measurements, the sage and ivory I had chosen 14 months before. The deposit went back on my card, in my name only. The order confirmation was sent to my email and my email alone. I did not share the order number with anyone. The thing about a room full of witnesses is that they carry what they saw with them when they leave. Gerald and Maureen Firth had been close to the Prescott family for 22 years. They had attended the engagement parties, the milestone birthdays, the Christmas dinners. They were the kind of friends who receive invitations printed on good cardstock and who consider their relationship with a family to be part of the architecture of their own lives. Maureen called Celia the following Tuesday. I know because Celia told me. The call lasted 40 minutes. Maureen didn't gossip, that wasn't the nature of the call. What she said, according to Celia, was that she had always suspected something was off in the way Patricia talked about the wedding, and that watching it in that dining room had confirmed something she hadn't been sure she was allowed to feel. She said, "That girl handled herself better than anyone I've ever watched handle anything." I am not telling you that for the satisfaction of it. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what witnesses actually do. They don't just see the moment. They recalibrate. They go home and they look back at every previous conversation through the new information and they arrive at conclusions they couldn't have reached before. The Firths didn't stop being fond of Patricia. But they stopped participating in the particular version of the Prescott family story that required Nora to be the background. Patricia made one attempt at a counter-narrative. She called my mother the week after the dinner, and my mother, who has 30 years of elementary school teaching behind her and can identify a talking point when she hears one, listened politely for 7 minutes and then said, "Patricia, I appreciate the call. But my daughter is the one I'll be speaking with about her wedding." She relayed the conversation to me that evening with the same steady precision she used to relay report card meetings. She wasn't angry. She was clear. There is a difference. The vendors were the most concrete shift. The florist Patricia had engaged called the week following the dinner to confirm the next planning meeting. I had sent a brief email the morning after the dinner letting her know that all future correspondence should come directly to Daniel and me, that the original contract remained valid, and that the centerpiece designs Patricia had approved were under review. The florist responded within the hour. Professionally, without editorial comment, which told me she had been navigating this particular dynamic for some time and was relieved to have a direct point of contact. The Lincoln Park apartment required a more deliberate conversation. Patricia had co-signed as guarantor, which meant her name was on a document, and documents have timelines. Daniel called the management company and explained that we would not be taking occupancy. We forfeited the holding deposit, $800, and Patricia's co-signature became a document attached to nothing. She had signed her name to a lease for an apartment no one was going to live in. There is a particular kind of loss in that, and I did not feel satisfaction about it. I felt the particular exhaustion of watching something expensive come undone because someone built it on the wrong foundation. I want to be honest about what the dinner cost. Not financially, the $800 was a line item, a number I could absorb. What it cost was harder to put in a file. I had wanted, somewhere underneath all of the documentation and the measured responses and the composure I had been building for 18 months, to be welcomed. Not as a managed variable in Patricia's plan for her son's life. As a person she was glad her son had found. I had wanted to sit at that table and feel, even once, that I was enough the way I was, without revision. I had been waiting for that for a year and a half, and the dinner was the moment I finally understood it was not coming. That is not a small thing to grieve. Even when you're right, even when the person who couldn't welcome you did things that were genuinely wrong, the grief of what didn't happen is its own specific weight, and you carry it separately from the anger, and it takes longer to put down. Daniel understood this in ways I hadn't expected. He had his own version of the same grief, the realization that the mother he loved had been operating from a place that required him to stay small, to stay manageable, to remain the person she could guide rather than the man who made his own choices. He told me one evening, about 3 weeks after the dinner, that the hardest part wasn't the confrontation itself. It was looking back at the last decade and counting the number of times he had traded someone else's comfort for his own just to keep the temperature in his family stable. I think I've been doing that my whole life, he said. I know, I said. Is that what I was doing with you? When I let her take over the wedding. Yes, I said. But you stopped. He nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they're filing something in a new place. Then he poured 2 glasses of wine and sat down beside me on the floor of the new apartment, which we had moved into 2 weeks earlier, and we ate takeout on the hardwood with our backs against the couch and talked until the city outside went quiet. The apartment has south-facing windows. I had specified that from the beginning. Patricia did not contact me directly for 6 weeks. When she finally did, it was a handwritten note, 1 page, cream stationery, her penmanship precise as always. She wrote that she had been reflecting on her behavior and that she recognized she had overstepped in ways that were not acceptable. She did not use the word sorry, which I noticed. She said she hoped, in time, that we would be able to find a way forward as a family. I read the note twice. I put it on the kitchen counter. I left it there for 2 days. Then I wrote back. I want to be clear about why I wrote back, because the easier choice would have been not to. She had cancelled my dress. She had systematically redirected every decision in our wedding toward her own preferences. She had used the lease as a mechanism of leverage. She had spent 18 months managing her son and calling it love. She had not earned a response. But I was not writing back for her. I was writing back for the version of this family that Daniel and I were going to build, and I did not want that family to begin with an unaddressed silence on my side. So I wrote to her, briefly, and I told her that the door was not closed. That I was not interested in pretending the last 18 months hadn't happened, but that I was also not interested in holding the account open indefinitely. That if she wanted a relationship with us, she would need to build it directly, not through Daniel, not through event planning, not through financial leverage. With me. Directly. Over time. On terms that included my actual name and my actual profession and my actual choices. I said one more thing at the end. I told her that I was keeping the sage and ivory dress. That the gown was being fitted next Thursday, and that it was exactly right for the ceremony. I did not hear back for 3 weeks. When I did, the note was short. 2 sentences. She said she understood. She said the dress sounded beautiful. I put that note in the folder with everything else, because that is what I do with documents that matter. We married in May. The venue was the one Daniel and I had chosen together, the third one we toured, without anyone's recommendation or pre-existing relationship to help us secure it. We paid the deposit ourselves in January. The florals were redesigned from scratch by a florist I found through a colleague, and the centerpieces were simple, white garden roses in low vessels, nothing that required months of coordination or anyone's pre-existing aesthetic to hold together. My dress was sage and ivory. The letterpress invitations arrived in February and they were exactly as I had requested, soft ivory cardstock with pressed botanical detail along the border, the kind that looks like something a person chose rather than something a committee approved. My mother cried when I showed her. The good kind. Patricia attended. She sat in the third row with Richard, dressed beautifully and quietly, and she did not coordinate a single element of the day. She did not approach me before the ceremony. During the reception she found me once, briefly, and told me I looked lovely, and I thanked her, and we stood in that small patch of civility together for a moment before the evening moved us in different directions. It was not warmth. It was not repair. It was 2 people choosing to be in the same room without making it into something the room couldn't hold. That, I decided, was enough for now. Not forever. Just for now. Grace is not the same as forgiveness, and forgiveness is not the same as trust, and trust, when it has been spent, has to be rebuilt from an amount of 0, slowly, with proof. I was willing to let that process begin. I was not willing to pretend it had already happened. Celia danced with Daniel at the reception until one of his shoes came off and he finished the song in his socks, and I laughed harder than I had laughed at anything in 2 years. Gerald and Maureen Firth sat at a table with my parents, and my father told them about the property lease business, which he thought was the most satisfying detail of the whole story, and Maureen apparently agreed. The new apartment is quiet in the mornings. The south light comes in at an angle across the kitchen counter. I keep my coffee on the left side and my files on the right, a habit I've had since the beginning. The folder is still on my laptop, archived now, closed. I don't open it anymore. I don't need to. It did the work it was made to do. I have thought about what I would tell someone who is sitting where I was sitting 18 months ago, watching a person they love navigate between loyalty and pattern, watching a family system absorb every boundary they tried to hold, wondering if their own documentation habit is paranoia or just professional instinct applied to a personal life. Here is what I know. The lease analogy is not just a professional habit. It is how I understand the world. Every relationship has terms. Most people just never read them. They sign at the bottom because the person handing them the pen has a warm smile and the offer sounds generous, and it is only when they need the document to protect them that they discover what they agreed to. I read everything before I sign. I always have. And when the terms were wrong, I didn't argue the language. I found a different building. Patricia is not a monster. She is a woman who loves her son so completely and so conditionally that she cannot tell the difference between the two, and that particular blindness has cost her more than she knows yet. She may never fully understand what she lost in those 18 months. She may rebuild something with us, in time, or she may not. That is not entirely up to me. What is up to me is the life on the other side of that dining room table, the apartment with the south-facing windows, the dress I chose, the marriage I walked into on my own terms. I kept my name on the lease. I kept the folder archived, not deleted. I kept the boutique manager's written account because I have always believed that documentation is not aggression. It is just the record of what actually happened, in case someone later tries to tell you it didn't. And I kept the dress. I will keep it for a long time. Thank you so much for staying with this story all the way to the end. If it meant something to you, if it reminded you of a moment when you finally stopped waiting for permission to take up your own space, check out the other videos on your screen right now. I think you'll find something there that speaks to you just as much. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It means more than I can say, and it helps me keep bringing you stories like this one. I'll see you in the next one.